and that'll be the end of the world and yada yada. I don't buy it, but hey, whatever. So the idea of these chips is that they're just identifiers. That's all they do, is they identify whatever you've tagged them with. Essentially, you can tell them to do a lot more, but that's the general usage of them. So let's say you put an RFID chip in a block of resin or plastic, and it's about the size of a credit card. You can use that to scan to enter into a door. It unlocks doors. They use those at different facilities all over the place. Erlanger uses them. I know a lot of different military installations use them. They'll have RFID chips embedded in different tags. That's just how it is. But with driver's licenses, that's causing a little bit of a problem. Now, I have a passport. It's a passport card, actually. And the passport card has an RFID chip embedded into it. Now, the RFID chip is actually, it just tells them where my information is located in the Department of Homeland Security servers. So the RFID chip itself doesn't actually give any sort of identifying information about me other than what's already displayed on the passport card, which is readily available anyway. So it's not really a privacy breach of any sort. After all, you're kind of consenting to that when you buy the passport anyway. So it's not really anything more than what's on the card anyway. So it's really not a big deal when it comes to the passport cards. Now, you could make the argument about, say, we shouldn't have to use passports to cross the border. I would agree. But you could also make the argument that, well, this just streamlines the process of getting across the border and makes it so that you may as well not even have a passport in the first place because the checking process is so fast. I could see that argument too, but I tend to be of the opinion that that passports tend to be a hindrance of our freedom and our right to travel, and thus are kind of they're kind of an infringement. But other countries probably aren't going to be recognizing that, so might be a little bit of an unrealistic expectation to say that passports should be done away with. That's probably not going to happen, but oh well. Driver's licenses, on the other hand, what purpose could they possibly have for putting an RFID chip into our driver's licenses? Well, the answer is actually quite simple. When you get pulled over and the cop wants your driver's license and you hand it over, so then he has to take it back to his patrol car and he punches in the information that's on that driver's license. That's a time-consuming process. By time-consuming, I mean it takes probably like 30 seconds. So it'd be much easier if you just had a chip inside your card and they had a reader inside of their car, their automobile, which they scan, and they scan your driver's license, and then it just pings the information on their server somewhere. That would be the easier way to do it for them. So late last week, the governor vetoed a bill in California that would put that inside that would put those inside of driver's licenses. The bill is proposed in order to automate and speed up border crossings as well, specifically, of course, at the U.S.-Mexico border, because you don't need a passport to cross that border. But privacy activists have warned that it would lead to a much more insecure information landscape. According to the ACLU, the law would have linked a person's criminal background check to their driver's license, potentially letting police officers know someone's race, citizenship status, and criminal history before coming into contact with that person, thus getting a preconceived notion about who that person might be, which is not really conducive to great police work, I would suppose, but I don't know. We're living in the age of information, and it's an unrealistic expectation to assume that the police are not going to have information in the age of information. Now, I'm not saying that that's a good thing. It's sort of a neutral fact, is that the police are going to have more information, just as we do. It's just how it is. There's positives to that. There's negatives to that. I mostly see negatives because I'm a very cynical person, but that is, again, it is what it is. The bill was proposed in order to automate this border crossing. And again, you have to prove that, well, you don't actually have to prove. You have to declare that you are a U.S. citizen when you cross the border. Crossing the U.S.-Mexico border, from what I've heard, I've never done it, is actually quite easy. If you're a U.S. citizen, you appear to be white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, you can cross the border pretty easily. But if you appear to be of Mexican descent and you don't speak English so great, then you might have a bit of trouble crossing the border at an official border crossing. I actually wonder how hard it really is to jump the border, so to speak. Would I be breaking the law, I myself being a U.S. citizen, would I be breaking the law by crossing the border at an unsanctioned border crossing? I wonder if that would be something that would get me shot or what, because I look like a regular American. I don't look like I'm from anywhere other than here, unless I had an accent, in which case I could be from any European country you want to point out, but I look like I'm from here. I don't really sound like I'm from here, but I actually am from here. I was born in Erlanger Hospital. I was raised in Georgia, reared in Georgia, and I still live there to this day. And I work in Tennessee, and that's me. I'm a Southerner through and through. I might not sound like it, but I actually am. Believe it or not, it's just how I am. I don't know why, but that's just that's just how I am. So I look and sound like an American. If I were to cross the border, I wonder, at an unsanctioned border crossing, and some a border guard jumped at me, would I be able to convince him that, no, look, dude, I'm actually an American, let me through? Or actually, American is not nationality. Look, dude, I'm a citizen of the United States of America, let me through. I wonder if that would actually work. I don't know. Researchers have proven over the past decade that sufficiently motivated hackers could actually reach RFID chips at various distances without the victim actually knowing it. Several years ago, Washington state researchers found that the state's enhanced driver's licenses for, or EDLs as they're calling them, as well as U.S. passport cards were vulnerable to skimming and cloning. Now, the idea of the whole skimming and cloning thing is if you look like the person on the photo in the driver's or in the passport card, then not many people look like me, but let's say somebody does, and they get they get the information that's on my passport card in the RFID chip, and they're able to forge a convincing enough passport card that the border guard scans it with his RFID chip reader, and it leaks back to me, and the guy just says, well, you're him, go ahead. They don't ask you to show any sort of other ID because your passport is your ID. So you're only showing one ID. And they don't ask for any sort of follow-up identification, which would be like a driver's license or a birth certificate or a bill addressed to you or what have you. You don't have any of those things. You don't need any of those things to cross the border, at least into Canada, in my experience. They may have changed things in the last few months, but that's how it was when I went up to Canada. It's a very odd situation where you have to show this ID, but it would be easy enough, I would suppose, especially for anyone with any sort of money, to fake this ID and then go up to Canada pretending to be me. I don't know why they want to do that, but you could. So researchers have proven over the past decade that it's very easy actually to scan RFID chips in cards. The thing is, you can get an RFID chip reader off of the internet for not very much money, under $1,000, probably under $500 actually. A few $100s probably. You can get an RFID chip reader, and then if you're walking around and somebody has a passport card, you can pick that information up and read it. It's weird, but you can read it. If somebody has, say, their key card for their work, for their office, you can scan that chip, and then you have that information now, and you can clone it on your own RFID chip, and then you can get into any building you please that uses that particular scanner. It's weird, but it could be done. So it's actually making things less secure than we were back in the days of the, pin and tumbler systems of locks. Kind of weird. Go figure. You'd think that physical security would be much, much more secure than digital security, and that does tend to be the case. There are a lot of smart people out there who are confident enough in their abilities to try to clone an RFID chip key card and then get into a supposed to be secure facility. That's kind of a problem. I can tell you firsthand, going through different buildings, that you can walk around in areas that are designated as, authorized personnel only, and people won't ask questions if it's a busy enough place. I can tell you that firsthand because I've done it. It's easy. Now, the best way to get through a facility is to wear a hard hat and a reflective vest. I'm not even kidding. If you want to get through any sort of area, act like you're looking around for stuff and wear a hard hat and a reflective vest, and probably no one's going to ask you any questions. That's a great way to get into different areas where you otherwise probably wouldn't be allowed. In fact, probably you could actually get into manhole covers just by driving a white truck, like a contractor's truck, and wearing a hard hat and reflective vest. You could probably get into any facility you want. Not saying you should, but you could. I've been doing a lot of reading up on urban exploration. There's a lot of different ways to get by. A lot of them just involve hiding in plain sight. So the idea of supersonic jets is being kicked around again. The last one we had was retired back in, I believe, 2003. And it was a shame when it was retired, really, because we need to progress when it comes to travel. We haven't really done very much in the field of travel in a long time, actually. I'd say the mid-'80s was the last time there was any sort of major innovation. I mean, yeah, electric cars are cool and all, but it's not the same. You know what I mean? It's just not the same. There's not been any sort of innovation, really, that we can point towards as being, the innovation that's going to change everything in travel or transit, whatever. There's not any sort of technology we can point at that is that. It doesn't make any sense to me that we haven't tried, at least, to progress in terms of public transit. Well, or transit at all. Actually, maybe we kind of have. The Hyperloop that Elon Musk is pushing might be kind of cool. I'm not sure if it's actually feasible. It seems like it might be. But think about cars. Well, actually, Elon Musk is working on cars too. The Tesla cars are, again, electric cars are not a new idea. In fact, electric cars were worked on alongside the Model T. And we had electric battery-powered cars back in the turn of the century. So these concepts are not new. It's just the method of delivering that power has changed a little bit, but the idea remains the same. It's a car powered by batteries. That's the same idea that we've been using since the late 1800s. Nothing's changed there. The internal combustion engine has changed quite a bit since the early days, but again, it's still the internal combustion engine, and it's still traveling at roughly the same speed it has, or it was 20, 30 years ago. The speed limits haven't really changed all that much. We're still traveling 55 miles per hour, supposedly, on Highway 153, going up from 75 up to Hickson. And things have not changed, really, in the last however many years. It's been a long time. Now, does that mean that we should move forward? I would say, yeah, we probably should move forward, because I'm bored with what we have now. I'm bored with drive from point A to point B. That's not very interesting. What would be interesting, though, is flying from point A to point B at supersonic speeds. We've not had a supersonic jet in a long time for, public transport, or I should say private transport that you pay for, but it's civilian transport. An SST is what it's called, a supersonic transport. And nothing's really been done with that since the early 2000s. And that's when the Monarch was decommissioned. Now, there's been ideas kicked around about having some supersonic jets. In fact, JAXA, I believe is how you say it, is the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Administration or something like that, has created a jet that they're hoping to release in 2015. Now, that's great, but that's in Japan. Japan seems to have the leg up when it comes to public transport, by the way. Japan has, of course, the high-speed rail that we don't have. Japan has a lot of stuff that we just don't have. The reason is probably because Japan is actually kind of a small country. It's an island. It's a few islands. And they can afford that sort of thing over there. Japan's economy can afford for that. Possibly, depending on who you ask. But in the U.S., we have lots of venture capitalists who would certainly be willing to make a buck off of some sort of public transport. So why haven't we really been seeing that? Travel by rail is still a thing. You can do it, but it hasn't changed since the 1800s. I mean, we're still using some of the same tracks that have been there since, seriously, the Civil War. I mean, look at how the tracks are here in Chattanooga. We have some great historic stuff in Chattanooga when it comes to railroads. But again, it's the same technology that's been there for 200-something years or 150 years. It's not changed at all. Maybe we should do something about that. Maybe we should look at some new options for public transit, or not even public transit, but private ticket-based transit. Hey, why not? What do we have to lose, really, other than lives and terrible accidents? What do we have to lose? These things need to be explored. We're not taking risks anymore when it comes to ideas of public transit. The closest thing we have, really, is Hyperloop. And it's kind of a pain. I'm tired of traveling the same old way. Hey, caller, you're on the air. What's up?
Who controls public transportation?
The governments, of course, municipalities.
Okay, that's why you have old technology.
Okay, you got
AKA
me.
The old Soviet Union with rusted, broken down railroads.
Yeah.
As long as government controls anything, it'll be old and broken down. Get government out of the business of everything.
Thanks. No, you're right. Actually, that was the point I was getting at, is that we have these venture capitalists, but they're being held back by the municipalities because you have to get tax breaks, you have to get permissions, all these different things. I think about the VW plant. Now, the VW plant being where it is great in Chattanooga. Making money, people employed there, all this good, all these great things. That's good. But think about the meandering we had to do to get the Chattanooga VW plant in there. All these tax breaks and all, incentives and housing and all this city money that went into it. But man, think about that. But imagine that for the entire country. If we're talking about public transport, the entire country now has to deal with all these different municipalities and the tax breaks and building all these different things. It's a pain. So imagine now how worse it would be if a private entity tried to build all these different things. So you have, say, an Elon Musk who says, I can build this and I will. But I can't because there's all these taxes and the municipalities are getting in the way and they're worried about some historic frog shelter that's been there for 200 years and all these different things. And it just gets in the way of progress, at least technological progress. So we do have companies which are working on supersonic jets. Boeing had one. McDonnell Douglas probably had one, except that it got bought by Boeing after that whole debacle with the fighter jets. That was a problem. But still, why don't we have supersonic transport? I'm seriously wondering, because we can break the speed of sound. It's not hard. Well, I mean, it is, but it's a feat of engineering, sure. But we could make that safe enough for the average pedestrian, I'm sure. So why haven't we? And again, the caller's right. The answer is government. It's municipality, tax breaks, all these different things that get in the way of progress, really. It seriously does. It's such a pain that we have to keep dealing with all this just nonsense of the government's getting in the way of us being better. Seriously, it is us being better. We lift ourselves up on technology and exploration. Hey, today's a great day to talk about that. It's Columbus Day, right? Think about it. Columbus made a huge risk. Now, granted, his huge risk was kind of funded by the crown. Okay, make an exception there, but still, he took a huge risk and traveled across this dangerous, treacherous waters to discover new land. Now, whether or not he discovered new land, some people are debating that. Maybe he landed in the Indies or the Caribbean or whatever, but still, he took a huge risk. The idea is still there. We don't have people like Columbus right now because it's not really allowed to be as dangerous as that. It's not. That environment is not fostered in our society anymore of people wanting to take risks. Now it's everyone doing what they're supposed to do. I truly believe that the public schooling system is pandering to that idea. It kind of has to for it to work. I was not brought up in the public schooling system. I've never actually been to a public school at all. So I have no idea what the system is like within, with firsthand experience anyway. I have no firsthand experience with a public school because why would I? I was taught to take risk. If you want to get something done, you got to take risk. Like the whole idea of you have to spend money to make money, right? That's risk. There's risk involved in all these different things. And we're taught in public schools not to take these risks. It's like, no, that's not safe. Wear a helmet, all these different things. That's not taking a risk. That's not making innovations. That's just coddling and accepting status quo. Why don't we have kids who are not accepting status quo and moving things forward with permission or not? Well, that's what we need in today's society. That's what we need in today's economy, because things are acting kind of stagnant in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to transport. And transport is what feeds innovation. We have all these different technologies that are brought to us because of transport, or different technologies that are innovated because of transport. The necessity is there. We need to make that necessity made. And travel is one of the best ways to do that. Think about all the different cool technologies we got from the NASA space program. This is Digital Drive here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240.
This is a modern world. This is the modern world. What kind of fool do you think I am? Just think I know nothing of
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
Fox News Talk 1240.
500 years ago, there were people on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, but neither knew about the other. On the western side, our side, the people had reddish-brown skins and lived in huts or wigwams. On the eastern side, in Europe, the people were white-skinned. They had learned how to build houses and large sailing ships, but they still didn't know much about the rest of the world. In fact, most of them believed the earth was flat. Then one day, a map maker named Christopher Columbus had an idea.
Do you know what? I think the world isn't flat at all. I think it's round like a ball.
Did you hear what he said? Did you hear what he said? He said that the world is round. Oh,
He's crazy man. I think the world isn't flat at all. I think it's round like a ball.
The world's as flat as the brim of your hat, and that is very plain.
I know that I'm right. Oh, I know that I'm right when I say that the world is round. Oh, I'm right. Oh, I'm right. My thinking is sound, and I'll prove the world's round. It won't take very long.
But it did take long, 7 long years, before Columbus could convince a king or a queen to let him try out his idea. Then Queen Isabella of Spain agreed to supply the ships and men for his trip. I will discover a shortcut to India and bring back some of the great wealth I find there. And I can do it, for I know the world is round. And instead of going east to India, I shall sail west and reach India around the other way. It will be a shorter and cheaper way, for I'll do it all by sea. Queen Isabella provided Columbus with 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. And on August 3rd, 1492, they set sail across the unknown Atlantic.
High on the foaming tide, over the ocean, onward our ships will ride, onward my sailors.
The ships sailed onward, but 2 long months after they started, there was still no sign of land ahead.
Turn back, Columbus! Turn back, Columbus!
We'll not turn back until we find India. Onward, men! By October 10th, the sailors and the crew were ready to take matters into their own hands.
If Columbus won't do as we ask, we'll put him in chains.
And we'll turn the ships around ourselves.
Wait! Have you heard? One of our men has just seen a branch in the ocean.
What of it?
It had fresh berries on it.
That means we're near land.
Hooray! 2 days later, the ships reached land, and Columbus and his crew saw the people with reddish-brown skins who lived there.
Oh, I think it is rather surprising that they should have reddish-brown skins. But now since we have landed in India, then these people must be Indians.
We'll call this part of India San Salvador, and I take possession of it in the name of the King and Queen of Spain. The people Columbus called Indians were very friendly, and they gave Columbus and his men many gifts, but not the rich jewels and gold for which they had come. For Columbus really wasn't in India at all. He was on one of the islands off the coast of America. But because of Columbus's mistake, the natives of America have been called Indians ever since. Columbus visited other islands near San Salvador, looking for the great wealth of India. And then he and some of his men returned to Spain.
Hooray! Hooray for Admiral Christopher Columbus!
Columbus had no trouble getting ships and men for his second voyage, but he still hadn't the slightest idea that he was headed for the vast continent of America, and that he would have had to cross it and sail over the Pacific Ocean before he could reach India by traveling west. The men of Europe were no longer afraid of the ocean. Columbus made 2 more voyages, and other explorers followed. But each year on October 12th, we celebrate Columbus Day, the anniversary of that day in 1492, when Columbus first sighted the land of the New World, America.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you...
Fox News Radio, I'm Pat O'Neill. Southwest Airlines playing catch-up after tech problems that led to 500 flight delays yesterday.
Some flyers at Kansas City are confused.
I'm just going back and forth between having them tell me to call the number and then go to the desk. Yeah, it's going to be a long day.
Southwest now says they expect all systems to perform normally, but they're still trying to rebook stranded travelers and route lost luggage.
Fox Radio's Evan Brown. Hundreds marching in Ankara, Turkey. Many blame the government for weekend suicide bombings that killed 97 at a peace rally. The prime minister says they're close to identifying one of the bombers, with ISIS the main focus of the investigation. California is considering using violent crime inmates to help battle wildfires. Nonviolent inmates have already been pressed into service. Inmates with a violent past would have to show a long record of good behavior in prison to be eligible to fight fires. Fox News, we report, you decide.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
An important part of travel is cartography. Now, cartography, by the way, is the mapping. We'll just call it mapping, right? We'll call it we will call it mapping from now on. Cartography. It's actually kind of the study of maps too, but whatever. Kind of like geography, right? And the cartography is, well, it's maps. Now, the idea of cartography is not a new one by any means. Maps have been drawn probably since the days of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve. Today's not a good day for speaking for me. Now, something that's kind of interesting is that in the early 1500s, I'm talking about 1512, I believe. Now, remember, 1492 is when Columbus sailed. So about 1512, a few years after Columbus, 20 or so, there was a map that was found, or it was used actually by an Ottoman emperor. Of course, this is in the Middle East, called Piri Reis. That's not Pee Wee Reese, the baseball player, but Piri Reis. I'm sure Keon Rose will be proud of me for making that reference. Piri Reis, it's or maybe it's Rise. I'm not particularly certain, but it's Pirireis, Piri Reis. And he was an admiral in the Ottoman Navy. And he had a map, which is commonly now called just the Piri Reis map. Now, that map is fascinating because it purports to, anyway, show accurately South and Central America. Now, that's odd for that era because, granted, 20 years after Columbus's expedition, you'd expect there to be at least some mapping. But remember, Columbus probably landed in what we now call Cuba or Hispaniola in Haiti. So it's difficult to say where exactly Columbus landed specifically. We pretty much have the island down. It's probably Cuba or what we now call Haiti. But still, it's kind of weird that he never actually, at least in that voyage, he never actually made it to America, that we consider to be America. He actually made it to the Caribbean. Now, that's not to downplay his accomplishment. That's quite an accomplishment. But it's still kind of amazing that he never actually reached what we would call mainland America. Amazing. But still, vast swaths of land like Cuba. I mean, it's huge. It's a huge island. We don't really think of it as being such, but he fully understood the scope of what he had done, I'm sure. And it's an amazing accomplishment to consider even today. It's even more amazing when you consider the actual size of the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Now, they varied in size, but I've actually been on one of those ships, not the actual one, but a replica of one of those ships was actually in Chattanooga not too long ago. And I had the opportunity to step on board, and it was really small. It was tiny, actually. It was really not bigger than a modern sort of a private, pleasure craft. Not even maybe about the size of a yacht. It was really not fit, I would say, anyway, for cross-ocean travel. Transoceanic travel is not something I would consider this vessel to be fit for. It was really kind of small. And yet still, he made it. All three ships made it. And with the hospitality of these, what we now call Indians, they managed to secure a pretty good reputation with those islands. And hey, it went from there. Still, though, it was something that I think is kind of funny about him landing in India, supposedly landing in India. He wanted to get jewels and such. And I'm wondering how he planned to get these jewels. Like, what, are you just going to steal them? Or, what are you going to do? Fortunately, he never actually landed in India. That's kind of funny to think about, actually, is that it's fortunate that Christopher Columbus never accomplished what he set out to accomplish. So sometimes great mistakes and horrible mishaps turn out to be great things. So go figure, huh? Cartography is an interesting thing. And I've been looking at different old maps and such. I just like how old maps look, really. It's just, I like how they are. There's such an interesting thing about them because nowadays we have satellite technology, or we can map the continental United States and everywhere else on Earth reasonably accurately with photographs too, because we can actually see what it looks like. It's not a estimation of what it looks like from someone's calculations. It is what it looks like from the top down, from space even. And that's kind of weird to think about. What would Columbus say if we told him, hey, in a few hundred years, about 500 years, we'll actually be up in space? What would he think about that? It's kind of weird to consider. I mean, even so, like, lots of technologies were still kind of not widely used by the public. Like, the telescope was expensive to produce. It's not like today where a replica telescope like the one they used back then would be easy to, manufacture. Back then, it was hugely expensive because those lenses had to be handcrafted. There wasn't a machine for doing that. It's weird to think about. It's just a bizarre time, and I'm glad I don't live in it. Despite my yearning for exploration, I'm glad I never lived in that era. I'm very glad that I live where I do and when I do now. That's another important thing. As I think about geography a lot, I'm glad I live in the South and this particular location within the South, but I'm also glad that I live in the era in which I do. People always talk about, oh, I wish we could go back to the times of this or that. I don't think so, really. I don't think you would actually want to go back to those times before, the polio vaccine or before mass communications and all these different things. These are good things that we have, and we're very fortunate. We're very blessed to live in the time we live in. So complaining is certainly fit for some occasions, but keep in mind that we should be thankful for what we have, too. I guess I'm getting in the Thanksgiving mindset a little bit too early. Oh, well. And in the spirit of being oddly impressed with politicians I wouldn't normally like, Obama's done something that's not terrible, which is kind of weird, actually. The Obama administration is not going to be seeking encryption backdoor legislation. Oh. FBI Director James Comey told a congressional panel that the Obama administration is not going to be asking Congress for legislation that would require the tech sector to install backdoors. I wonder who paid him off to do that. Hey, Carl, you're on the air. What's up?
I don't believe that. They're a bunch of big fat liars. They almost collapsed Microsoft and Gates because of it. They're always going to have a backdoor. Anything they say. By the way, the liberal media, it just disgusts me that they're not mentioning Columbus Day. They're embarrassed by it. Oh, because of him, we attacked the Indians. He was a man's man. Can you imagine any man in this country that has enough guts that would sail in the opposite direction when the general consensus was the world was flat, with the possibility of falling off in a stinky old rickety ship with stinky men, no real running water? Hey, now come on, not knowing what you're going to run into. Giant animals you've never seen before, savages.
Right.
It was guys that had guts, explorers like Columbus, and the paid left-wing news media, which is everyone out there, can't give this guy any credit. And why are the kids in school today? I think they're off for Martin Luther King Day, aren't they? Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's kind of weird too, that they're treating it like a holiday, but I mean it is, but this is a great opportunity to teach kids about exploration, which is kind of important. I don't know why it is we're pushing this narrative. Well, I do know why it is, but it bothers me anyway. They're pushing this narrative about, oh, it was dangerous and probably shouldn't have done it. It's like, but we wouldn't be where we are now had he not. Whether good or bad his intentions or whatever, we can speculate about that all day, but that doesn't change the fact that it did happen. And that's kind of the realization that needs to come to pass, is that we have to realize that good or bad, these things did happen and we should learn about them, right? We can pretty much agree on that, is that history happened and we should learn about it. Were you going to say, well, we shouldn't learn about World War II because Hitler was pretty bad, so we shouldn't teach about him, and Mussolini was not a great guy, and FDR was not well, actually, we'll pull that one back, but still, we're just going to say we shouldn't learn about World War II because all these people were bad. No, we should learn about World War II. We should learn about World War I and every other historical thing that's significant. And there are a lot of things that they would consider to not be historically significant, which I would say are. There's lots to history. We're talking about, more than 2,000 years worth of history to learn. There's a lot to learn, yeah, but the things which have directly and obviously affected us today are also extremely important. And yeah, Columbus, whether you like him or not, it doesn't really matter. It should be recognized that his accomplishment was crazy. And I mean that in a good way. He was kind of nuts. And I mean that again in a good way. Because, hey, that's something I wouldn't do. Think about it, too. He's traveling across the ocean with limited provisions. It's not like, well, if they get lost, they can just turn back. I mean, if they don't make it, they're dead. And that's kind of a big deal. The whole idea of if you don't make it, you're dead. It's the equivalent of traveling out into space, really, because you have limited provisions. You've carefully calculated all these different provisions, and you have very carefully calculated consumption, hence rationing. And if something goes wrong, somebody gets a little bit greedy and drinks too much water, potentially someone's going to have to, someone's going to have to get dehydrated and die, potentially. And that's kind of weird to think about, especially in today's era where we have pretty much too much of everything. There's no short supply of food and water and anything else you could ever want. It's weird. It's all very, I guess it's just odd. Now, the thing with the Obama backdoor thing, though, is kind of interesting because, yeah, the Obama administration might not be seeking encryption or legislation or whatever, but probably he doesn't have to, is the thing, because Congress is probably going to implement this whether the president wants it or not. And really, it doesn't matter what the president wants either, is kind of another thing, because the president doesn't actually have power to push encryption backdoors into different devices anyway. Also, it should be recognized that whether or not the manufacturers of these devices realize it, there probably is a backdoor somehow into these different devices, like an iPhone or an iPad, or especially iPhones and iPads, or Android phones and tablets and your laptops and anything else you want. There's some way the government can get information from it. No matter how secure you are, there's always some way to get information from it. And anyway, the cell site simulators are kind of where the hole is being filled there, where they're saying, well, they can put as much encryption as they want, but we'll capture it on the transmission side. So that, yeah, we might have it encrypted, but you think government doesn't have enough supercomputers to calculate this information? That's an easy task for them. Well, FBI Director James Comey told a congressional panel that the president's administration won't ask Congress for legislation requiring the tech sector to install backdoors into their products so the authorities can access encrypted data, which is, of course, a good thing, however intentioned it is. Comey said that the administration will now continue lobbying private industry to create backdoors to allow the authorities to open up locked devices to investigate criminal cases, and, of course, the buzzword terrorism. The thing is, if I owned a tech company, I wouldn't touch the FBI with a 10-foot pole. I wouldn't let them anywhere near my offices. I would put up a big old sign that says "No Feds Allowed," because really, that sets a bad reputation if you collaborate with the feds. Not just here, because you have to think about the international implications of that too, because they don't like the FBI even more in different locales. Think about, you're trying to sell products in China, and it turns out that you're collaborating with the U.S. authorities. They're probably not going to take too kindly to that over there. So you have to keep that in mind too. So it would be essentially suicide for these different companies to openly collaborate with the feds. I wouldn't do it behind closed doors either, but if you can make money, hey. The administration has decided, he says, not to seek a legislative remedy now, but it makes sense to continue the conversations with industry, Comey told a Senate panel of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee on Thursday. Ooh. Comey's comments come as many in the privacy community are awaiting a decision by the administration over whether it would seek a legislation. Many government officials, including Comey himself, have called for backdoors. All the while, there's been intense lobbying by the White House to guilt the tech sector for a backdoor, and Congress has remained virtually silent on the issue that resembles the so-called crypto wars. Now, again, this is kind of weird that they're not saying much of anything at all about cryptological backdoors. Why aren't they? What's up here? You'd think that all of our different senators and congressmen would at least have a position on it, and I haven't seen one. Now, I'm going to be calling up Lamar Alexander's office and, of course, Senator Corker's office and my senators and representatives in my area to see if they have any sort of comment on that at all, but I kind of doubt that they will, because there's not been any sort of general consensus from the Republican Party yet, and they're not going to speak out of turn, I guarantee you. So probably we're not going to be seeing anything out of them on cryptography anytime soon, unfortunately. Oh, well. So the president's public position on the topic, meanwhile, has actually been kind of mixed. Obama said that he is a supporter and believer in strong encryption, but also sympathetic to law enforcement's need to prevent terrorist attacks. So basically, he has no solid stance on it that's public. The government's lobbying efforts, at least publicly, appear to be failing to convince tech companies to build backdoors into their products. Some of the big names in tech, like Apple, Google, and Microsoft, have publicly opposed allowing the government a key to access their customers' encrypted products. All the while, some government officials, including James Comey, of course, have rallied against Apple and Google for selling encrypted products where only the end user has the decryption passcode, which sounds good to me because I don't want law enforcement getting their grubby fingers on my information. Why should I let them? Why should I allow my information to be easily obtained? And it's not just law enforcement either. If there's a backdoor into a technology, any sort of competent hacker can probably get into that. There's going to be some sort of exploit of it that'll get into it reasonably soon after a backdoor is announced or not announced. There are people analyzing, say, Android code all the time. Android is open source for the most part, so there's lots of different modifications to it. And I guarantee you there will be some sort of privacy-minded Android distribution that's designed to be used on cell phones reasonably soon after it's announced that there's backdoors in Android. So it's not like there's no one trying to get into your information. They are, hence the lobbying. It's just there's not an immediate need for it right now because they have other ways to get to it. By they, I mean those people in the FBI. There's other ways to get your information, so having a encryption backdoor thing is not really high priority for them. Possibly they're not wanting to show their cards when it comes to the FBI's ability to decrypt information without the actual encryption keys. That's entirely possible that the FBI is actually not wanting to show its hand on that, but I kind of doubt it, honestly, because we all kind of know that the FBI has methods for decrypting information like that. So I don't know. It's a tough situation either way. It's all about control anyway. That's what any of these different products or projects, I should say, or initiatives or whatever that the FBI or any other intelligence agency is going to put out is about control. Controlling people internationally, controlling people domestically. It's all about control. And it seems now the new target is the tech sector. If anyone steps out of line in the tech sector, they need to be beaten down and said that they're domestic terrorists or something for not bending to our every whim. I remember when James Comey came out with a statement saying that Apple needs to be the responsible corporate citizen that it always has been and put backdoors into its encryption. Yeah, no thanks, buddy. You know, and I have to say that I'm kind of applauding Tim Cook here, the CEO of Apple. Whether or not I agree with him on all of his politics, because I certainly don't, but still I have to applaud his resolve in not dealing with the FBI. Now, I don't know definitively that he's not dealing with the FBI, because it could come out 10 years later that, oh yeah, Tim Cook is actually a former FBI agent or something like that. Who knows? But as it is right now, he's at least giving the appearance of not wanting to have any dealings with the FBI. And I have to say that I do rather applaud that. According to a letter to Obama from the tech sector, we have this statement. If American companies maintain the ability to unlock their customers' data and devices on request, the governments other than the United States will demand the same access and will also be emboldened to demand the same capability from their native companies. The U.S. government, having made the same demands, will have little room to object. The result will be an information environment riddled with vulnerabilities that could be exploited by even the most expensive or dangerous regimes, or repressive, I should say, or dangerous regimes. That's not a future that the American people or the people of the world deserve. And that letter is actually absolutely correct. If the American government can man backdoors, then the Russian government can too. The Cuban government can. The North Korean government probably already has. The Israeli government or the governments in Iraq and Syria and the UK and Europe and in Germany and all these different countries, they would all demand the same thing. And none of them should be given that access. That's the thing. It's not just, oh, you're anti-American. No, I'm pro-freedom. And I don't want there to be my information floating out there for any government to grab, or any competent hacker either, because if there's so many backdoors designed for each and every different government, because they're not going to want to all use the same backdoor, obviously, that leads to a culture where there is essentially no privacy whatsoever. There may as well not be any privacy anymore if that's what you're going to do. And I kind of think that the governments will be okay with that. They'd probably be okay with there being no privacy whatsoever for every citizen which uses these different services. You know, they don't care. That's the thing. Governments don't actually care about your well-being, in the sense that they need you to stay alive for you to pay taxes. But other than that, they really don't care about your well-being. That's just the nature of governments. They need you to stay alive to pay taxes. Hence, the whole government's trying to kill us all narrative really not working. But that's about it. As long as you're paying taxes and buying products, the government's pretty much okay with you. So it doesn't care about your privacy. Government never has cared about privacy, and it probably never will. There's no reason for government to care about your privacy. So it's more in the government's interest to care about, say, infringing upon your privacy, because that's what governments do. It's not just the American government, as bad as that is. It's every government, because any sort of state is going to demand less and less freedom from you. That's just the nature of it. That's just how it works. As soon as you've put people in power, then they're going to demand more from you. After all, the old saying goes, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's true. So if we put more power in the hands of, say, one person, then he's gonna be very corrupted. That's why I don't want a strong leader or a strong president, because the strong president is, well, going to be very corrupt, because people are going to be appealing to that president for more things and more control, and that's kind of the opposite of what we want. It's also kind of the opposite of the American idea. It just doesn't really work. Case in point, in Turkey right now, there's been ordered a blackout of cell phone information, and actually just internet too. Turkey has ordered a temporary media ban after a deadly suicide bombing, and internet access is reportedly limited right now in Turkey. In the wake of a horrific suicide bombing in the Turkish capital city of Ankara today, Twitter says that users across the country were struggling to access the social network. Now, this could be due to bottlenecking, but it doesn't appear to be. Twitter says that scattered reports suggest that internet access is also limited. A link to the bombing has not yet been confirmed, but the Turkish prime minister ordered a temporary publication ban in the aftermath of the bombing, banning media reporting across the country. Now, can you imagine if any American president had the ability to do that? Can you imagine? What if Bush did that after 9/11? What a debacle that would be. What if Obama did that after the Boston Marathon bombings? What a debacle that would be. And yet in Turkey, it happens because in Turkey, they have granted the prime minister the power to do that. And that's kind of, again, a problem. Why are we allowing this? Why are they allowing this? I should say it's none of our business here in the States, but why are the Turkish people allowing that? The bombing killed at least 95 people and injured close to 300 during a peace march near Ankara's central train station. The march was organized to demand an end to renewed hostilities by the state with Kurdish militants. According to reports, the prime minister suggested the two separate explosions came from suicide bombers, possibly tied to the Islamic State or Kurdish rebel groups. We're not sure which at this point, but the point is, people died. And that's not good. Civilians died. Non-militants died. That's terrible. That's a tragedy. And guess what? Tragedies need to be reported. We need to know the information. The public has a right to know these things, or at least the public, the journalists have a responsibility to report these things to the public, I should say. And yet that's not really happening now because of this media blackout. Now, again, that's in Turkey. That's not in the United States. But don't think that it can't happen here, because it very easily could. In fact, we're swiftly on our way to that happening here, to be quite frank with you. There could be some constitutional loophole they would pretend to find that would say the president has the power to order a media blackout in case of national emergency, like Rex 84 and all these different acts that are all just scary. They'll be worked into the NDAA, where there'll be a media blackout program that would make sure that only the right information gets out following a tragedy. That sort of thing sounds far-fetched now, but it could very well happen. After all, it happens elsewhere. Why not here? That's the big question. It's not like it's far-fetched. It's actually quite realistic to expect that something like that could happen. This is AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio here on hotnewstalkradio.com as well. Go to Hot News Talk Radio on TuneIn and then search for, Hot News Talk Radio. Also, check us out on the Hot News Cam, only on YouTube. Just go to Hot News Talk Radio on YouTube, and you can watch us streaming live there. Clutch with Keon Rose is up next here on Hot News Talk Radio. He is our resident sports expert. I hope he doesn't bash my Bulldogs too badly. Today is not a good day to be a Bulldogs fan, I have to say, following the Vols game. So I have to concede to my friends in Tennessee. Namaste, good job. The Vols won. Oh, well.
This is a mob mode. This is a mob mode.